So we must be, there we are. Good. It's good evening here, and welcome everybody who's tuning in whatever way you're getting this on YouTube. It's a return after the Lenten break of the Catechism study, a return to Amos, a very significant minor prophet. They're all significant. I remind you, minor doesn't say anything about their esteem or value. It's just, they're short books. That's what minor means, over against the major. And we're doing chapter 4 this evening, and we'll do a chapter a session until we finish all 9 chapters. For those who are here, the schedule will be, we'll have a break on May, the middle of May. I'll be gone. It's May, it's 15th, 16th, it should be May 16th. I'm going to Salt Lake City, where my granddaughter is in a school musical, and Beauty and the Beast, I believe. And she's been in musicals before. She's 7th grade. And I haven't been able to get away in May usually, and my wife has. And she did last year, and Natalie apparently expected I would be there, and she was disappointed that I wasn't. So I felt like, okay, well, I didn't know if that mattered that much, and I was kind of tickled to hear that, so I'm not going to miss it this year. Any remembrances or thoughts or questions about what we've covered so far in Amos? He is a prophet from the southern kingdom of Judah to the northern kingdom of Israel. He has the harsh word of the Lord to say to this kingdom that is doing well economically, is in a relative period of peace. There are the empire of Assyria is on the rise, but is not on the march yet. And when Amos will allude to the judgment that will come to Israel and other nations as well, it will be Assyria that brings the actuality of that about. And we know historically that happened, and it brought about the destruction of that northern kingdom. It did not recover from its conquest and exile. And that's what these chapters are after an introduction to Amos and the setting that we are just hearing the level of iniquity and transgression on the part of Israel, and the consequent judgment that God will bring upon those who are so far from the will and way of God, those who are in the comfortable classes who are in a position of power to take advantage of the poor, the marginalized, and they think they're doing well because God is pleased with who they are and what they do. So Amos is slicing that apart bit by bit, piece by piece. It tends to sound repetitive, but in the pace we're going, and with I'll probably just speak for myself, that when I look at one chapter, I kind of forget what's in the previous chapter. Does that happen to you? So it sounds kind of fresh, but all the time. But the actuality of it is that there is always another way to look at it, to go to a different level of it, to come at it from a different perspective, and that's exactly what chapter 4 does. So we'll read just the first 3 verses first of all, and that gives Jan and Steve and Mark a chance to read a verse apiece here.
Okay. Hear this word, you cows of Bashan, on Mount Samaria, you women who oppress the poor and crush the needy, and say to your husbands, bring us some drinks.
The Lord God, he has sworn by his holiness that, behold, the days are coming upon you, when they shall take you away with the hooks, and even the last of you with fish hooks.
You will each go straight out through breaks in the wall, and you will be cast out toward Harmon, declares the Lord.
That's right. I'm glad you read verse 1, Jan, because it brings out a point. in your translation. And I'll reverse one for mine, the New Revised Standard Version, very similar. Hear this word, you cows of Bashan, who are on Mount Samaria, who oppress the poor, who crush the needy, who say to their husbands, bring something to drink. What you read, Jan, was the cows of Bashan. And then rather than who, well, actually, it was the next sentence, who oppress the poor. Your version said women who. So it immediately made the assumption that the cows of Bashan are women.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I'd be leery of making that assumption,
Yeah, tell
although
me
everything
about it.
points to it.
I would
To
too.
just jump in and say, because the Hebrew would not say women, it would not use that word, it would use the pronoun who. That is a pronoun, isn't it? So this is what I remember bringing up once prior to us getting there. Maybe I just said, think about who the cows of Bashan are. So this introduction is Amos intentionally singling out the women, those aristocratic women, it appears to be. Women who are displaying their conspicuous wealth that's bestowed on them by the husbands, most likely, the males who dominate them, maybe fathers even. And they are in a position where, lo and behold, we know it's a patriarchal society and dominated by men, and the men hold the power and have the key to whatever direction society is going to go. And these very wives are able to say to their husbands, bring something to drink to me. So, but first of all, cows of Bashan. Cows, is that a reference that women like to be compared to, or use cows to describe a woman or refer to a woman?
Not in today's world.
Not in today's
No.
world. Yeah.
I don't know about him.
I
Yeah.
don't
Amos's
think
time.
so.
Well, we don't know about ancient times. So the likelihood that that cows versus bulls, cows are female, so we can start with that. Cows of Bashan, it's a territory. You might have notes if you've got any study notes there. And well, I'll ask you, Steve, what does your note say about
Cows of
Bashan?
Bashan, a description of the women of Samaria who lived luxurious lives.
Mhm.
Bashan was a fertile region below Mount Hermon, east of the Jordan River, known for its lush pastures. Under Jeroboam II, Israel was enjoying great prosperity.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So Bashan was the meat producing area, good pastures and climate and so forth, east of the Jordan River, east of the Sea of Galilee too. The Jordan River begins at the Sea of Galilee, and it's if you wanted a good steak or a good pot roast, and it came from a cow of Bashan, then you've got quality meat. And what goes by that now? I can think of Kobe beef, and maybe there are other things. Some go for the corn-fed beef, and some go for the grass-fed beef, and various ranchers and farmers will tout their particular way of raising. And so cows of Bashan was a reference that would be familiar to everyone who's hearing this or reading this, and that it refers to the women of this area around Mount Samaria, around that region now. That is the northern part over above Judah. So the idea that these women are cows your mind today might flash to talking about physical appearance, and that we wouldn't call a woman cow no matter what her physical appearance was, because that would be offensive. But in that day and age, it just may be that a curvy, well-rounded woman would be appealing to a man. There are lots of cultures where having some weight and heft to you means you're in a status where you can eat well and you're not skin and bones, and so you want to achieve that. Though it's not derogatory about women, about their physical appearance. It's just that quality, and the cow of Bashan would have great value. So that's a positive thing to say about a woman. That even if this is somebody who is a child of God, as any child of God has value in God's eyes, well, we'll start from there. But it's about the conspicuous consumption that is most problematic to Amos. And so he's using that phrase, and in the context, it just drives it home and drives it home. You who oppress the poor, who crush the needy. Rather violent verb to use. And whether they literally got crushed, which may refer to a stoning, that would be capital punishment, but it's probably more figurative that everything they had was being crushed. All their hopes and dreams and prospects and their ability to make a better life for their children, that's all crushed by the circumstances and the stance and the way that these women even are integrated into this. They're co-conspirators with their husbands, and there's that little extra twist to it that Amos gives, that they're so pampered that they've got their husbands or their fathers around their little fingers. You wouldn't expect that to be, I don't know if they generally said it just out loud, or they may have reached some sort of status quo with their husband that they could say, bring me a drink. I would think maybe it would be more like the batting of eyes and say, honey, could you bring me a drink? Maybe that's what works.
Who came up with the name for these different fertile regions? Because in the beginning of Amos, they have Carmel, and now they got Bashan, and they all talk about fertile regions.
Carmel is fertile. That's that mountain where you can expect the thunderstorms to show up, which made them think that the god Baal, who was a thunder god, a storm god, resided there, and because they had the consistent, reliable rainfall, the crops they could grow there. So it was a lush region. Not the only one. Bashan was one too. So maybe it's the climate there, something about being near the river, which isn't a great and mighty river, but the Sea of Galilee is a fairly sizable bit of water. So sometimes these water regions create their own weather, and
their own weather,
rainier, and
because Carmel was around the Mediterranean Sea, and Bashan was east of the Jordan River.
So, and Amos himself, being the shepherd he was, which might just be a lowly task person, or he may be a sheep raiser. We've taken that into possibility and kind of given some credence to that if he actually owns the land and raises the sheep and has to take care of the marketing of them, that he did get around enough, and that's why he was out of Judah and into Israel, that he knows he's a sheep person, but he knows enough about livestock to say he can use the reference to Bashan, the cows, and that all stands out in his mind as a proper reference, and he can draw from his experience of what's the proper way to call attention to the point he wants to make. These women are implicated in the status that oppresses the poor and crushes the needy. So both genders and all ages and every economic status that is above those who are being crushed and oppressed is falling under this judgment. So just because you're a woman who can wrap daddy or your husband around your little finger doesn't mean you're going to wrap God around your little finger and escape the punishment. So if there are cows, then those are the females, and then there would also be the bulls. So there is a nuance to that too that might cause you to think that the bulls, the powerful men in the lives of these women, these studly men, maybe Amos is taking a poke at them too. You know, your wives say, "You bring me a drink, honey, rub my feet," and all that kind of stuff that should be done in a mutually comforting and healthy relationship. Not likely to happen so much in that society, but who knows what goes on behind closed doors, and the men are really just trying to keep the women happy because they know what can happen if mommy ain't happy. That, they will contribute to that. So it's the cows of Bashan were known, but also the bulls of Bashan were known, and they were known to be ferocious and to be healthy and good studs, and the herds grow under them. But the poke at them is in the bringing something to drink, that you studs here, you're not man enough to protect your women. So he's packed a lot in there about just what's going to collapse upon these people. In sort of a connection, and I'm doing it maybe just to drag this out a little bit more, but Steve just read from his note that this is under Jeroboam 2. There was a Jeroboam 1 then, and this is Jeroboam 1 was the king who was king of Israel after the rebellion that did split the kingdom. Now I'm going to read something from 1 Kings chapter 12, which is early in that history of Israel. That's going on the theme with cows and bulls. And now, if you got cows and bulls, well, you put together a cow and a bull, and what do you get? Calves. You get calves. So this is the 1 Kings 12, 28 and 29. So, well, I could start a little earlier. I'll just start with the beginning of that. And the caption to that section is Jeroboam's golden calves. Then Jeroboam built Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim and resided there. So this is all in that what we call Israel now. And Jeroboam said to himself, now the kingdom may well revert to the house of David. So he's recognizing that Jerusalem is not in his kingdom, it's in the southern kingdom of Judah. And the people will go to Jerusalem, the temple, to worship. And he's got to stop this flow, otherwise he'll just lose population probably. So if the people continues to go up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, the heart of this people will turn against their master king. Will turn again to their master king Rehoboam of Judah. Rehoboam is the son of Solomon. They will kill me and return to King Rehoboam of Judah. So the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold. So calves of gold can't help but remind us of what?
Moses,
Mount Sinai, Aaron, giving up on Moses ever coming back from Mount Sinai. And he said to the people, you have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Just like the people who instigated Aaron to use their jewels, their all that they had snuck out or actually possessed in Egypt, and they didn't possess much. I remember the part of the Passover that we don't hear much was the Lord said, go to your Egyptian neighbors and say, can I borrow your necklace or your rings? And so they had those in their possession when the Passover night came, and Pharaoh said, get out of Egypt. So they stole the wealth, a good portion of the wealth of Egypt that way. So Jeroboam set up these two gold calves, one in Bethel and the other he put in Dan. And this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one at Bethel and the other as far as Dan. So the sin was worshiping away from the temple in Jerusalem, which is not the deepest and most profound sin that you could have, because anywhere you were in that territory, it wasn't a large country, but travel to Jerusalem was difficult. So maybe you kind of hedged on that a little bit now and again. But it was the fact, what Jeroboam declared about the calves. So the bulls, the calves, the bulls, the cows, and now the calves. And there is a history to these calves, not only being idols, as they were at Mount Sinai, and Jeroboam just basically says, these are your gods now. And that also slunk into the fact that there were temple prostitutes. If you're going to go into pagan worship, that's something that was included too. And God is profaned in that way as well, because the calves are just sort of a pointer to the fact, here's a place for temple prostitutes.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, archaeologists have unearthed shrines with the inscriptions and showing a calf, and it says, Yahweh and his lovers. So mocking Yahweh, the true God, and saying, you just know better than these pagan gods and all the sexual practices that go along with the pagan religion. But other than that, it's the women themselves, these flesh and blood women who are pampered and conspicuously consumptive. These are the ones that Amos recognizes. They're as much of the power structure as the men are. And they might even be the motivators to the greediness of their men trying to satisfy the women or one-up their neighbors by showing off how well their wives are dressed. And let's see, I've got a reference to Isaiah 32 here, and I don't remember what that is. So I'm going to look it up. Isaiah 32, 9 through 12. Because at some point I thought that was, I don't even remember seeing this yesterday in the morning group. Isaiah 32, 9 through 12, which reads, the title here, the caption is Complacent Women Warned of Disaster. Rise up, you women who are at ease, hear my voice, you complacent daughters, listen to my speech. In little more than a year you will shudder, you complacent ones, for the vintage will fail, the vineyards, the wine. The fruit harvest will not come. Tremble, you women who are at ease. Shudder, you complacent ones. Strip and make yourselves bare, and put sackcloth on your loins. Beat your breasts for the pleasant fields, for the fruitful vine, for the soil of my people growing up in thorns and briars. So there's Isaiah's way of calling the judgment upon the complacent women of the time. This would be about Judah, actually, as it's a later time. So women will need to fear God's wrath as well as men, and the consequences of sin fall across, as I said, both genders and all classes. But when I say that too, I also want to say, as we'll find that in Amos 2, that so does salvation fall across both genders and all classes. So that's to recognize there is hope embedded in here too. Not right now, but we're going to talk about judgment on all people. Salvation is offered to all people too. And we don't want to get too caught up in the judgment and kind of revel in that and say, oh, they're going to get it, they're going to get it. So it will be clear as we finish the chapter that God just isn't bloodthirsty and happy that he's got to bring this kind of activity against the people about. It all is to lead to something so that things will be better than they are now. The crushing aspect of that too. There may not be the stoning, but I should have remembered that part of the punishment for not being able to pay up your bills, repay a loan, keep up with your rent, pay the portion of your crop, being a sharecropper, you might get polled or struck, beaten. If you want to consider women and what godly women are like, or to hear again what ungodly women lead to, where is the wisdom about being a man as well as a woman to be found? What book of the Bible? And how about Proverbs? Yeah. So I've got a couple Proverbs references here. There's Proverbs 22, verse 16. And if you don't want to look for it, I'll read it. Oppressing the poor in order to enrich oneself and giving to the rich will lead only to loss. That's not gender specific, but it is a piece of wisdom that applies across lines, men and women. More gender specific, that was Proverbs 22:16, is Proverbs 31, verse 20. Very near the end of Proverbs. And the title to this section of chapter 31 is Ode to a Capable Wife. So one of the qualities of a capable wife, she opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. So the hands, Pastor Carey's Good Friday message was about hands. So you heard that, Steve. I don't know if you were there or not. Yes. And hands that who might crush the needy. And that's not the purpose of hands, the striking and the beating, but to open your hands. Remember when my 12-year-old dog now was 6 months old. We got him at 6 months, and we took him to a training, and it was in a group. And one of the people in the group, her young dog, and she was good to her dog and nice, but I didn't see it. But apparently the instructor caught that she gave him a slap or something, and he went, no, no, no. Hands are for two things: for playing and for feeding treats, not for any of this. Yeah. So that stuck with me. It's not only about dogs, it's about people too. Well, these verses say that women will be punished by the real Lord. This God has sworn, verse 2. This punishment is so serious that God will swear. We have commandments against swearing. You don't use the Lord's name to swear, because we're not equal to being so right about what we might say, even though it might be true. Don't get used to bringing God into your business that way, as there may be aspects of what you are swearing about that you don't see and realize. But God can swear, and God can swear by His holiness. And that is is that the rain against the... Okay. So Folks, it's raining rather nicely out the window here and tapping against the window pane. That God's divine nature is God's holiness. So I know this comes up a lot. What does holy mean? At its root, it means separate or other. So the otherness of God is what we experience as God's creation. God is God and we are not. It's a simple way to put it. So don't try to mix those things up, and that's when trouble happens. So this otherness of God is, this holiness of God is so awesome in contrast to human frailty and weakness, and especially human self-centeredness, that Amos uses this expression to just impress upon the people. You stand against God so thoroughly that this ought to be rather frightening to you. The awesome perfection of God is over against you, and that's an overpowering reality. So humble yourselves and shake before it and fall on your knees. It's not the first time Amos has said this, but he's, it's what he set up early in the book too, in chapter 2, that this activity, the way they were living in Israel, was profaning God's holiness. So these aren't light accusations, and the punishment will be equal to the evil. The warning there takes this shape and uses the image of hooks, or the actual reality of hooks. So this is a way of saying you people are going into exile. So the time is surely coming. I swear it, God says, it is surely coming. You can count on it. Then you will be taken away with hooks. We're still talking about the women of the cows of Bashan, but it applies to all people. And even the last of you with fish hooks. So is there a difference in hooks and fish hooks? And what would a person of the time, or Amos himself, think are the hooks? What kind of battle weapons involves hooks? I can imagine quite a few, one way or another.
Not like the pirates and some of those that were on the high seas.
Then you've got grappling hooks, and you've got ways of slashing people. And so maybe when I think about it long enough, there are weapons that are just kind of straightforward. A sword just has a blade, and a spear just sort of one-dimensional, so to speak. And you add a hook to that, and maybe that can gouge a little deeper. It's going to be nasty warfare.
Yes.
And taken away with hooks. So you get somebody off the stage with the hook, right? You don't want to leave the stage, but we're going to have you leave the stage in a more violent way. And then to be very specific about the fish hooks, there's imagery too. You've been fishing, and you got your stringer with the fish on it, and the baskets of that time may have had hooks around the edges so that they hung them there. And there is evidence too that hooks were actually put into the lips or the noses of people, so that when they were led away and roped together and strung together by those hooks, you're going to be careful about trying to ditch the line, because you got this hook in your lip. So that's, and they would know what that's talking about then. We've heard about these people being taken off by hooks. And then verse 3, the breaches in the wall. Who builds a wall and then puts holes in it? So that's not the way the wall was built. It's got breaches because you were attacked and the walls came down. So you're going to be let out through the walls that have failed you and taken away, and away you go, and you shall be flung out into Harmon. You, who's got notes on Harmon?
Through the breaches into Harmon, captives will be let out of the city through breaches in the walls, depicting massive overthrow. The location of Harmon is unknown.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to get to. Nobody knows what Harmon is. You've got the word composed of Hebrew consonants. You've got H, R, M, and N. So some think, now why it was translated into English as Harmon was some kind of scholastic committee said, well, the insertion of vowels there seemed to say you can't make anything else out of it but Harmon. Although others could say if you take the vowels away, because originally it wasn't written with vowels, and you might get something like Armenia then, which I think was a known territory. And let's see, what else do I have in here? Why does it give me a, oh, that must be an L. Okay, my study Bible doesn't give me anything other than I already have. But I think what it indicates, or it might be Mount Hermon too, but I don't know what kind of threat that would indicate, because that's just a familiar landscape and there's nothing going on at Mount Hermon that would serve the Assyrians ultimately, or be frightening about it. If it was a flaming volcano or something, then you might say, yeah, I sure wouldn't like to wind up at Harmon, which could be Mount Hermon, and thrown into the volcano. That's not there. But it does lend itself to thinking like abandon hope, all ye who enter here. Dante. That's what Harmon is meant to be, whether we understand where it is or not. So you're not going to like where you're going to go. And you're going to go out single file like cattle with hooks in your faces.
The last statement at the end. You know its word declares the Lord.
Yes, thus says
You ain't getting out of that
the
one.
Lord. This God who swears by his holiness. And they knew enough. I mean, these are adult women, and they're women of the world enough to know what happens specifically to women taken into exile. At best, you're probably sold into slavery, and you best hope you might be sold into a rather kind situation, a family or a business even, and not being mistreated too much, but slaves can pretty well count on being mistreated. And among the mistreating there is going to be the raping and the ravaging and the humiliation, not necessarily in that order of severity, but it all adds up to an unhuman humiliation and physical revolting actions taken upon you. So they will experience a total deportation, which means a total separation from the care and blessing of God, even though they aren't leaving Jerusalem. And Dan and Bethel and Gilgal, we'll see in the very next verse, are pseudo worship places in the minds of faithful Israelites. You won't even have that. So you're leaving the land of promise to go into a place where you will abandon all hope. And the message, as has been indicated before, by Amos is you thought your privilege and your wealth were your security and power, and you are discovering not at all. That only comes through your relationship with God, a good and right relationship with God. So you see anything else in there that you wonder about or have some idea about? Continuing on, just the next two verses, 4 and 5. So Jan and Steve, if you'd read that.
Go to Bethel and sin, go to Gilgal and sin yet more. Bring your sacrifices every morning, your tithes every 3 years.
Offer sacrifice of thanksgiving of that which is leavened, and proclaim free will offerings, publish them. For so you love to do, O people of Israel, declares the Lord God.
Says the Lord.
Mm.
Could say swears the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So come to Bethel, and we read about that, about the first Jeroboam and the golden calf there. Gilgal is the same situation, a place of worship. And it becomes in the mind of faithful people who know where true worship takes place. These are places of transgression. But the tone, try to capture the tone that Amos has here. Come to Bethel. We've got a Bethel Lutheran church here, lots of Bethel churches around. And those people want to say, come to Bethel. Come and join us in worship and celebration, or as we do at first, join the celebration. It's right there in our publicity. We welcome people. So come to First Lutheran and transgress. Come and sin. Have an orgy here. That's the tone that Amos has. A mocking tone. Come to Gilgal, and boy, the horrid things you're doing, or the guilty things you do, the guilty pleasures you have, come and multiply them here. Just get carried away here at the place of worship. And you know, in parallel with that, there's a shift here. But I think what Amos wants to get at is that when he says transgress and multiply your transgressions, and then refers to things that make sense to happen at a church or worship place, saying what you actually are doing at your worship place is no better than what I just suggested you might do, this transgression. So bring your sacrifices every morning, and you could substitute transgression there in Amos's mind. To bring your sacrifices. You think they're sacrifices and they're pleasing to God, but they are transgressions. And your tithes every 3. Now I will find out who's got differences in translation here. Bring your tithes every 3. And what did you read, Jan? Bring your tithes every 3
years.
Every 3 years. Mine says, and maybe every 3 days. Every 3 days. The law commands you bring your tithes every 3 years. So there's the big stewardship push every 3 years, not even a yearly thing or not a weekly thing. So and I think 3 days is probably the better translation, because it's the translation that doesn't make as much sense as 3 years.
Yeah, I agree.
And the Hebrew word for day is significantly different than the Hebrew word for year.
Mm-hmm.
And the Hebrew would be day. Yom is the word, as in on the first day God created, and the second day God created 24-hour days, evening and morning, the first day, and so forth. So that's kind of ridiculous. But it indicates that, yes, bring your sacrifices every morning. Well, you're not called upon to do that every morning. There's a Sabbath to do that at. And you bring your tithes every 3 years. So You think, even if you do this, and I think Amos is realizing that those who are following the law, as the law says, are feeling so good about themselves doing this, even while they are oppressing the poor and crushing the needy, that they feel God ought to see this as the same as me doing it every morning. Or instead of tithing every 3 years, I tithe every 3 days. It's yucky in Amos's mind. And the sense of that continues in verse 5. Bring a thank offering of leavened bread and proclaim free will offerings. Yes, just exactly what you should do. But then publish them and proclaim them. So, in other words, brag about them. Mm-hmm. Hey, everybody, see what I'm putting in the... You might think about Jesus in the temple and the story of the widow's mite, about the offering trumpets that they had, and they were metallic, and those who wanted to catch a little attention, well, you've got your metal coins, and you kind of let them clank in there, so everybody said, hey, what's that noise? Oh, that's a lot of coins going in there. What a godly person. So it's the comparison to the widow's mite that Jesus makes, but that's what's showing up here. For so you love to do. So bring an offering, let's see, the possessive there in verse 4, your sacrifices, your tithes, because Amos knows and God knows that's the way you see it. This is me doing it. This isn't sacrifice or tithe and offering. We are returning only what is God's already. But no, they're thinking, we earned this, we worked for it, and worse yet, we screwed the poor people out of their money. That's how we got it. And so we're giving a portion of it to you, God. So you've actually blessed us in doing this, God. So twisted and corrupted was their thinking, and Amos points that out. So you thought you're getting away with it, and you are not. So anything else there?
Question.
Yeah.
What type of bread was that Saturday night?
That is Pastor Carey's homemade bread.
Okay.
Using the recipe for communion bread, she said that Luther Seminary uses. Now, she didn't go to Luther Seminary, so she must have found that online or come across it another way. Though it's the first time we've ever done that.
Yes.
At least since I've been here.
Just did not look like regular bread.
Yeah.
It looked like a...
Flatbread?
It looked something like a flatbread, but it was a real dark brown.
Yeah, it would. I doubt there was any yeast in there, so it was unleavened.
That's what
Probably
I figured. Unleavened,
I think a little thicker than most of the matzah bread I've seen used for Passover. So maybe there's a touch of something in there, and a little more taste to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there is. Okay, let me use that as an example to go back to the Catechism and Holy Communion. Okay. I mean, you've probably got your opinion about whether you like that or you don't. And I know there were some people quite baffled because when you're the pastor and you're trying to keep the line moving too, that you break it off and you're going to get either too little, less than you think, because people have to intinct it. They have to dip it in the wine.
I want to get my fingers wet.
So yes, but some of those pieces wound up pretty large. And someone commented to me that I thought you were going to break that in half, and you didn't. Because I was afraid, and just getting a feel for it, if I broke it in half, I would wind up with more than just breaking it in half. I'd have nothing but smaller pieces.
Yeah.
In fact, I was kind of taking smaller pieces and shoving them to the back part of the napkin and eat them afterwards. So there were difficulties with that, and that comes. There are congregations that use nothing but homemade bread, and they just deal with that. And so people like that preferred the wafers, where you can get a grip on it with maybe arthritic fingers too, and it's not going to crumble, and there is a pretty good adhesion to that bread.
Yeah.
So the advantage goes to wafers in some people's minds, and then there are others who, and they may have experienced homemade bread, in their growing up or wherever they came from in their history. What I say in First Communion instruction in the years back when I did that, or just in talking about it in general like now, that when it comes to the actual texture and size and lack of taste in the wafers, well, that can indicate that there is nothing conspicuous about the bread. It's just simple, and the lack of flavor is that you're concentrating then on what Jesus means,
That's right.
and not about the quality of the bread. But then on the other side, and I'll let you say something, is that this is such a holy and precious meal that maybe we ought to use the best we have. When I do home communions, my communion kit has glasses in it, which means every time I come back from visitation, I've got to wash those glasses out. And I know some pastors use the plastic glasses and you just pitch them. In my mind, I think this is just a little nod to this is the Sunday best that I use glasses. Most people don't know. Doesn't matter if they're plastic or they're glass, but there are some who say, you use glass? And they'll say, can I wash them for you? I say, oh no, I'll take care of that. I'm used to doing that. So that would add to the bread too. Okay, that's what I wanted to say about
comment one time with the leftover wine, which you were doing it, and with the bread, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, but I just thought about that. Because as you and Pastor Carey were at the very end right there, I don't know why I did, but I was sitting in the second row. I looked over, and there was very little, if any, crumbs on the carpet there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why I did it, and all of a sudden I thought back when you were talking about, the wine and that.
Yeah.
There was very little crumbs at all with that stuff.
There were a lot of crumbs in the wine by the time we finished.
Was it?
Yes. So, and the wine as we did quiet communion on Easter morning, and I didn't have anything to do with it after we did it at 7:30 before the 8 o'clock service, but then when we finished at 11:30, 11:45 and did that. So I took mine and we had the intinction cup, and I took that to the kitchen and I drank the wine. I finished the wine. There wasn't so much that I couldn't do that. I didn't eat all the bread. Put the bread back in a little container we've got in there, and it can be used again, and that's proper. So that's my practice. Either drink it or pour it outside, return it to the earth or the animals or the plants. I don't know how many animals. We had a little infestation of fruit flies.
You were talking about that.
Yeah, I tell you about that. Because after evening worship, I would always go to the plants along the window upstairs and I pour the leftover wine, which wasn't much. But then somebody, and it could be, I don't know if you can prove it or not, said, who knew I did that, thought maybe the wine was attracting them. Because even in my office, in my coffee cup or my tea or my latte, you have the little buggers flying around there. And so, and the truth of the matter is, when I stopped doing that, and I didn't see it much. So you see them, they're all over anyways, but these were just a little bit annoying. So I was culpable in that, and I was glad to stop it. Mhm.
Not the worst thing in the world.
Okay, the rest of chapter 4. And this all fits together as one section, verses 6 through 13. And you will know the pattern and the repetition to it. So starting with you, Mark, we'll read verses 6 through 13.
I gave you empty stomachs in every city, and lack of bread in every town, yet you have not returned to me, declares the Lord.
I also withheld rain from you when the harvest was still 3 months away. I sent rain down on one town, but withheld it from another. One field had rain, another had none, and dried up.
So 2 or 3 cities would wander to another city to drink and not be satisfied, and yet did not return to me, declares the Lord.
Many times I struck your gardens and vineyards. I struck them with blight and mildew. Locusts devoured your fig and olive trees, yet you have not returned to me, declares the Lord.
I sent plagues among you as I did in Egypt. I killed your young men with the sword, along with your captured horses. I filled your nostrils with the stench of your camps, yet you have not returned to me, declares the Lord.
I overthrew some of you, as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah, and you were as a brand plucked out of the burning. Yet you did not return to me, declares the Lord.
Therefore, this is what I will do to you, Israel, because I will do this to you, prepare to meet your God, O Israel.
He who forms the mountains creates the wind and reveals his thoughts to man. He who turns dawn to darkness and treats the high places to the earth, and the Lord God Almighty in his name.
Uh-oh.
Uh-huh. Uh-oh, good response. So,
But it's true. They're getting their punishment for
yes.
all their transgressions.
And they're getting their punishment for their transgressions, and yet God has a deeper purpose for this punishment. God is not just satisfied that you're punished, but 5 times it said, what is God's hope?
To return to him.
Yes,
Mhm.
this is why it's happening. So, and the time span from how this kind of corruption in the faith develops to God now acting on it is a long period of time. And God has been patient, and in that patience is grace, and God has sent the prophets, and the word of God has been available to the people, whether it's prophet or not, and they didn't respond to that. So God is forced by their inaction to do something to keep them from just going even deeper and deeper into iniquity. So there's grace in that. It looks like a backhanded way to get at grace, and I guess it is, but if this is what it takes, God will do it because God wants the people to return to him. So you know Steve Martin, the comedian? Yeah, he's got some catchphrases, but I'm pretty sure it's Steve Martin, but there was, this reminds me of that. And he'll do a little bit on this, that, and the other thing. So I can't remember exactly what he says, but I'll use these words here, verse 6. And if you can imagine Steve Martin. I gave you cleanness of teeth in all your cities and lack of bread in all your places, but no, you did not return to me. Am I right in remembering
right.
that?
Yeah,
Yes,
you are.
but no.
Yeah.
So verse 6, there may be, I discovered this yesterday. My version says, I gave you cleanness of teeth. And who read that? You did, Mark. Did you have cleanness of teeth?
Well, I have a footnote that says that.
Yes.
But what they chose to use was empty stomachs.
Empty stomachs, yeah. So it's famine. So it's famine and drought and pestilence and war that are the four horsemen here in this section here. This is what all these verbs and all this talk it amounts to. So cleanness of teeth, if you've got that version, you can just think if you don't have anything to eat, nothing's going to get stuck in your teeth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the phrase there, the idiom. And the rain, you notice it rains in some places and it doesn't rain in other places, and they might be right next door to each other. So who really has control of the rain? So just talking about our weather here, you just can't really know what it's actually going to turn out to be. But rather than a god like Baal or Hadad or Rimmon, it was one of those weather gods, you think that God is in control. No, the true God is in control.
Mm-hmm.
Can be precise or is cause you to not know. Just I was counting on this and it was withheld from me. And you didn't return to me. Sort of in the middle of it, only a little past middle, but it's verse 10 where we really understand where these references come from. After the manner of Egypt, the pestilences. Verse 9 had the locust, and there's mildew and blight, but Egypt endured 10 plagues. There really boils down to 4 here in this, but anybody who hears this or reads it knows the references. Oh yeah, I remember those plagues in Egypt, and it's happening to us. We who were rescued by those plagues now have those plagues falling upon us. We who have heard the story of Sodom and Gomorrah and knew what evil that was that God had to wipe them out with fire and brimstone. It's happening to us. Prepare to meet your God, verse 12. Prepare to meet your Maker. It often gets used. It's almost part of our everyday common language and in our thesaurus of idioms. So what do you think of when someone says, prepare to meet your God? Is that a good thing to happen?
The general concept was first used in Israel's preparation to receive the covenant of Sinai. Here she was implored and being prepared for his judgment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and verse 10, I will do to you, and because I will do this to you, prepare to meet your God, the God who was sworn by his holiness, his awesomeness. You're going to go to war. Prepare is part of that too. Get ready for war. Get your sword sharpened and pound it into shape and put on your armor and get your chariots ready if you're using chariots, because you're going to be at war. And who you are at war at ultimately is your God. Mm-hmm. The God you are used to being on your side and bringing you victory has now declared war on you. And who is that God? Again, that's verse 13. That's like a doxology to bring an end to the chapter.
And if that doesn't send a message, just look at the first part of Genesis.
Huh?
I am that God.
Mm-hmm.
I created this, and
yes,
just wanted to give you a reminder, I am the one.
Mm-hmm. I created the mountains, the places where your primitive, superstitious side of you says, even if you are my people, you still think there's a Baal up there living at the mountaintops. Mm-hmm. I created that mountain. And you can't miss the mountain. You see that. But I also created the wind. And you can't see the wind, but I created those things you cannot see. And wind is also breath and spirit, the very same word. Mm-hmm. So anytime you use any one of those three, it's really meant for you to think of the other two as well. And it talking about natural things, mountains, so probably the proper equivalent would be wind, but breath is the breath that God, what's the word, inhaled into Adam.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, I created your life is really what it's saying, the very air you breathe.
You always hear too, God always knows what you're thinking. And he has right here,
Yeah.
declares to man what his thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, I already know what you're thinking.
I know what you're thinking. And I thought enough about you to reveal myself to you. You didn't have to wonder if what you're doing is right or wrong. So I made it quite clear what I think is right and wrong. And you, if you're choosing the wrong, you're not doing it because you're ignorant. You're doing it because that's what you want to do.
So
Yeah.
you know, has that phrase been used elsewhere?
Which one?
The verse 13, that description of God.
Well, I don't know if it's repeated exactly that way, but
There's
there are.
John Michael Talbot song that has that phrasing, and I'm wondering if it. I can't remember it being saying that it came from Amos, so I was curious if it was.
Yeah, if it's from Amos, and the times that God as creator are mentioned are numerous, and what is used then to refer to God, mountains, is fairly common.
Mm-hmm.
And here I kind of think of it as our Colorado Springs psalm, is Psalm 121.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I look to the hills, from where will my help come? We've got the mountain here.
Mm-hmm.
We identify ourselves with the mountain. Something like, reveals his thoughts to mortals. No, I couldn't put my finger on it, but I know there are other ways that, if not exactly those words, where that idea is shared. Makes the morning darkness, that might be unique. Is that what Talbot uses?
Yeah, it's this phrasing,
yes.
almost identical. So I was just curious. Like I said, I just didn't remember it being referenced to Amos, but I'll look it up when I get home.
Yeah, my notes here.
The only Bible had any other.
The only other reference is within Amos itself, 5, 8, and 9, and 9, 5, and 6.
Okay. You know, and I'm just glancing ahead here. Actually, there's the song must come from Amos because there's other references here.
Okay.
The Pleiades and Orion. And,
yeah, the Pleiades. So that takes care of chapter 4. A little shorter chapter. Yeah, isn't it something?
That's very good.
And it doesn't stop. I get a little nervous as I do these studies because the points are just sort of general points that get repeated again and again. But the skill of the prophet and the nature of God's word is that it can just add some layers to it and go a little deeper, or take a different perspective on the very same thing that's already been covered. And I as a reader and even as a teacher would say, I appreciate the skill that's involved in the word craft that's here, both as it is written and then to utilize it in an oral way, and to hear it, and to do the best we can with the English here, and the things that are hidden in the Hebrew, such as puns. There are a lot of Hebrew words that are so close to one another, but we don't know that from the English. And they either create a repetition or they create an opposition to each other in the Hebrew, which is pretty well finessed as language, but we miss it in the English. Notice chapter 5, which we'll do next week, is verse 1 says it's a lamentation. So that is a form of literature, a form of expression that's unique. And there is a book of Lamentations, so you might want to said to be by Jeremiah. So you might want to look at the whole book of Lamentations and just be able to read this and take into account what's being lamented and what is the nature of Lamentations.
But really, at the end of all 9 of these verses, you could actually use this in everyday living.
Mm-hmm.
Yet you did not return to me. Because, anytime I've always felt anytime that there's something that you think you can do and it doesn't go right, the correct thing to do is okay if it didn't go. God is always standing there waiting for you to come back.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're that pig-headed that you don't want to come back, then
If you're
why
pig-headed,
didn't you return to me?
Pig-headed is
and
what he
ask-
said, in case you missed that.
And ask me,
That's-
hey,
Mhm.
what did I go, where did it actually go wrong?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where did it go wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Go back to him and try to right your wrongs.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I mean, there's always forgiveness there to try again and do better.
There is forgiveness. There's resurrection. That's what resurrection is. It's not just about literally being dead and being brought to life again with a new body. It is in the everyday deaths that we experience, failures, mistakes, setbacks, and a chance for a new start, another chance. That's resurrection. That's what Jesus risen from the dead is, and that's the power God gives us too. Jesus right here with us. Come on, let's pick it up and try again.
Saturday night, you could also tell to the new members of the church and stuff like that, because I heard a little bit of the thing, and even Tanya was caught by surprise. Afterwards, I says, now did you think you were going to be baptized, rebaptized again? And then being cleansed of your sins all in one night? She looked at me, she said, I never thought about that.
Uh-huh.
I says, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The actual vigil would be something that takes place much later, and can go from midnight to dawn. So many churches do sunrise services that you're not going to do a vigil if you're going to do a sunrise, or if you're going to lead a sunrise service, you don't want to be doing a vigil, or at least not from midnight to or whatever it works, because we do 3 readings in our version of it, and there are 12 readings that belong to a vigil, and then the actual baptism of those who have spent the 40 days preparing for baptism. That's what Lent meant in the ancient church, which even before the 40 days, it could be as much as 4 years of preparation before baptism. So those early persecuted Christians were not inclined to accept into their midst those who would just say, that's it for me when I got a little persecution, discomfort from this. So let's close with a benediction. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up his countenance upon us and give us peace. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Go in peace, serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Praise the Lord.